All right. All right. Looks like we're live. I'm here with Dan Blumstein coming to us from UCLA, which I lived in Spain for a long time. And one of the charming things that Spanish people do is they pronounce acronyms. So you're at UCLA.
UCLA, yes, people say that all the time. I laugh and
Yeah.
smile.
Cool. And you might get a delivery from Oops, UPS. Yeah, cool. Hey, listen, I really, this is going to sound like I'm blowing smoke up your ass, but sincerely, I really enjoy your book. I'm about halfway through it. You sent me a PDF a few days ago to prepare for this, and I thought, well, I'll just sort of, dip in and out to make it look like I've read it. And I read the prologue and just kept going. It's fantastic. And I'll pay you one of the highest compliments in my repertoire here, which is to say that it reminds me a lot of A Primate's Memoir by Robert Sapolsky, which is one of my favorite books.
He's a better writer, but thank you so much.
I don't know. It's been a while since I read it, but the way you
I cried when I read that book, Primate's Memoir.
yeah, it's
Um,
so good.
when
Yeah,
when the animals were getting diseases and dying, it's like, oh my God, this is so sad.
yeah. Yeah, but I mean, the writing is similar, the tone is similar. You're both, scholar adventurers. You're in Pakistan, you're in India. By the way, you and I were in India at around the same time. You mentioned Jim Corbett State Park. I was there in 1987.
No way.
Yeah,
It's super ironic.
yeah, yeah.
It's a great park. I mean, the thing that was really so Corbett Park's one of these tiger reserves, and an old girlfriend and I went there, and I sort of had belly the first of my many bouts of dysentery in India, and we're biking mostly, but then we went there sort of to recover because I had to get healthy, and it's just an extraordinary. One of these tiger reserves, the Indian tiger conservation has been incredibly successful by setting up reserves and protecting the animals in them. Ecotourism was a big thing there. And at the time, you could ride elephants, which I probably wouldn't do now for ethical reasons, but we rode elephants to go around. But you had to ride elephants to get around because the vegetation was really high. And the main vegetation in a lot of the park was marijuana growing wildly that was like 12 feet high. So you're in the back of an elephant going through all this weed, literally, looking for tigers, which we never found until we went to a tower and then we found the tiger. But at the time, they also had this orphaned elephant baby. So we got to hang out with Salam, the elephant, and caress this little elephant baby and play with it, and that was like the high point of my life.
Yeah, yeah, that's cool. Did you get up to Chitwan in Nepal?
No, we were in Nepal, but I've not been to Chitwan. A colleague there is doing really interesting work in Chitwan now, where they're trying to develop autonomous recording devices to identify tigers there, because tigers kill people there. So to sort of say, well, map where they are so people know where they are, so people can then manage that risk.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. I also saw you mentioned Franz de Waal, who was a friend of mine, awesome guy, one of my favorite scientists. I've told this story on the podcast before, but basically, my first book, I sort of used a lot of his research and turned some of it back against him, or not against him, but against some of the arguments that he had made. And I got pangs of consciousness as the book was approaching publication. And so I sent him an email, him and two other scientists. I sent them an email saying, look, I relied on some of your research, but I disagree with some of your conclusions. And I feel like it's only fair to run this by you. So if I'm making a mistake or misrepresenting you in some way, you can tell me. And he wrote back and said, okay, send me the sections, you're referring to. And I did. And we had this exchange, and he was like, well, have you considered this, or have you read that, or, whatever. And then after, five or six, back and forth emails, he said, oh, you might be right. I really like the way you write, and this is an important book. And I was like, holy shit, this is a scientist. This is
Well,
a
but I
guy.
mean, first of all, he was a mensch. Second
Yeah,
of all,
yeah,
I mean, it's okay to be wrong and it's okay to have your mind changed. And, if your mind can't be changed, you're not an empiricist.
right.
And, we should all be empiricists. We should all be Bayesians. We should, update our estimates of things based on evidence. And I mean, in
Yeah,
society today, what is evidence? We can talk about that if you want. But I mean,
yeah,
I know that there is truth out there. I know that if you're an animal and make a mistake as estimating predation risk, you're going to have you're going to die. So there is a truth out there. And then the question is, how do you find it? And science, I think, is the best way to find it. You have principled arguments about things, and you're trying to reject, you know, the ideas, and you focus on the ideas, not the person. And
yeah,
that's great. And he was an extraordinary scientist and an extraordinary human.
yeah. Fantastic guy. His ego was totally disconnected from his arguments, which is a great lesson for all of us, I think.
It should always be.
Yeah. Do you think do you think that this is part of the crisis of our age, that this distinction between ego and argument, this separation is being lost? I mean, just
Yeah.
what's happening at the CDC as we record, like vaccines and it's a very strange time where people are not letting the sort of arguments or the data have the conflict. It's all become personal.
It's all become personal. It's also all become sort of unstructured and unprincipled. Universities should be safe places to allow different voices to speak. I mean, I'm pretty liberal, but universities are a safe place, should be a safe place for conservatives as well. The overreach we have from the administration and society is in part that universities have not been a safe place for conservatives to speak for a while. That's bad. It's always been bad. It will continue to be bad. And then this overreach we're having is going to destroy universities, which is going to destroy us all. But at some level, open science is a great thing. You give people the ability to have access to primary literature, but then you're not training them. I mean, you can give little kids knives and really sharp knives, but you got to train them how to use the knives before they start playing with them. And information is powerful. And if you start from a position of trying to prove yourself or an argument, that's the antithesis of a scientific perspective. The scientific perspective is trying to refute things and, have principled ways of doing that and structured ways of doing that. So, it's great to share information with the public. It's great to have open access data. It's great to allow people to investigate themselves. And it's also important to recognize that one size doesn't fit all. That the whole idea and the promise of personalized medicine is, there are deviations from average, and there is context that leads to, if I have this pre-existing condition, then maybe I shouldn't be doing this for that. But if I don't have this, then I should be doing this, to get better or whatever. So all of these ideas are simultaneously true, but then how it's been weaponized by anti-vaxxers and non-scientific people and people trying to break the system down or break the system down under the guise of saving money or whatever, isn't good for anyone. And the role of research universities has been to be a place to train people, um, to take risks at government expense that then allows some people to make a ton of money, commercializing discoveries that benefit everybody. And, that's been sort of the compact we've created since Vannevar Bush and, after World War II, that helped us win the Cold War, helped the US become a leader in biomedical and all other forms of research. And, we're destroying that under this guise of destroying wokeness and under this guise of everyone's right and there are no truths. And it's terrifying. I mean, we're the first rule of playing with guns is don't put it in your eye and pull the
Yeah,
trigger.
yeah, yeah. It's a real mess. Last night I was watching MSNBC, Chris Hayes, the his show, and it was really interesting because I'm pretty liberal too. I'm beyond liberal probably. And but I was watching Chris Hayes, and he was talking about the CDC and RFK Jr. and he called him a hack, and he said, "Why do I call him a hack? Look at this." And he showed, I guess it was during his confirmation hearing or something, and a black senator or congresswoman was interviewing him, and she said, "You have said that black people should be given a different vaccine than white people. What, how could you say that?" And he said, "Well, there's evidence that African Americans have a typically have a different reaction to vaccines, to antigens than, Caucasians." And Chris Hayes says, "See what a hack this guy is." And I thought that's interesting. And I Googled, are there racial differences in response to vaccines? And there are. So there is a lot of primary science in Lancet and New England Journal of Medicine and other respected
I mean,
journals.
two comments on that. I mean, students at medical school still think when surveyed, medical students today, maybe last year, still think that black people don't have to be given as much anesthetics because they don't feel pain in the same way. That's
Right,
just bullshit. That's
right.
just bullshit. Um, you know, um, Ancestry is different from race.
Hmm.
So race is doesn't really exist. Ancestry, having, you know, genes and evolved genes and living in an area and having evolved adaptations, whether it's lactose intolerance or a suite of anti-malarial traits. A lot of people in the
Right,
Mediterranean have these anti-malarial traits.
right,
G6PD, not just sickle cell. You know, um, Ancestry and local adaptation, or people living in very high elevation areas like in Tibet or
Peru. Yeah,
in Peru, have different hemoglobin genes. There's been local selection on people, but that is not to say, quote, you are black and therefore, that's to say that's the personalized medicine approach, which is much
right,
more nuanced.
right. Well,
So
that's
this
why I
this
mention it.
racial statement is that I agree, it's kind of a hack statement, which is not to say there's not a bit of truth there, that if you have a particular genetic background, things may work differently for you. So my long-term studies with marmots have taught me two things. One, um, you know, that that I can take. I mean, we've been studying these marmots for 64 years. I can take 20 years of data and get one answer, and another 20 years of data and get another answer. And that's not because we're cooking the books. That's because things change over time, and we have bouts of
Yeah.
selection going one way, another way, and et cetera. And the other thing is that context is everything, and effect sizes are small. And
Hmm.
many things. Not rolling your tongue. Rolling your tongue. If you have one gene, I can roll my tongue, right? That's a single gene mutation. But many, genetic effects are small genetic effects and cumulative or quantitative genetic effects, meaning lots of genes have small effects on things. Yet, understanding that is a real challenge, and understanding the G by E, the genes by environment interactions on how they create traits. Whether these are fitness related traits in animals, or they're how we respond to medicines in people. All these, this is a major wonderful challenge of the future. How we're going to get there now that we're destroying the university research enterprise, I have no idea, but
Yeah.
we need to know this.
Yeah. I mean, it's so everything is so contentious and charged, that my point was that I feel like, there's the sort of woke bias, there's the anti woke bias, and they generate one another. I was talking, I forget who it was some academic, and we were talking about a dispute that they'd had with someone, and it was a big deal. I forget, it was Stephen Jay Gould and someone, and this academic said to me, "What you need to understand is that it benefits both sides because it generates attention, it generates focus, and so like a lot of this stuff is ginned up."
Only if you're interested in eyes. I mean, the
It
whole
clicks. Yeah,
social media,
yeah,
I mean, I'm barely on social media. The whole social media enterprise is destroying us. It's both wonderful in that it's giving people voices, and people are sharing things in ways. And I mean, we have a lab Instagram account for our Marmot stuff, but people follow us, and I'm looking at sort of who's following us and whatever, and looking at their like amazing wildlife photographs, and it's like, how cool is that? I can waste my time looking at pikas doing, carrying hay in, wherever. So that's the wonderful thing. It's a sharing thing. It's a community thing. It's extending our social connections with others, which is great. Unfortunately, it's been weaponized against us. I mean, why? I forget the name of the film, and it came out a couple of years ago, but like all the big tech people who create this shit for us don't let their own kids use it. I
Right.
mean, that's telling you something.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So, okay, I was afraid this was going to happen because you're such an interesting guy that we would just start talking and time will go by and we won't get to your book. So let's pull in the book a little bit here. The Nature of Fear. My first question is I wrote my first book is about sexuality. And when I look at my life, I say, well, I was an extremely horny teenager. And one of my first intellectual passions was why? Why am I feeling this? Why is this? This was so interesting because of the experience I was having. So, were you a fearful teenager?
No, I mean, I used to mountaineer and climb and extreme ski and, do all sorts of other things.
Yeah, you don't seem
Um,
like a fearful guy. You're
no, I
riding
mean,
a bike in Tanzania. I mean, what the hell, dude? Or
yeah.
Kenya, I guess it was.
Kenya.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, but I mean, risk assessment is essential. I mean, understanding how you can push things, understanding how to take risks so you can take them again the next day. So I've always thought about, risk assessment, whether climbing or skiing and dealing with
Mm,
avalanche risks and other things. It's harder to deal with estimating the risks of being killed by someone else. I mean, people kill more people than pretty much anything else. We're pretty good at that. Um, I've always been interested in that, but then studying animal behavior, behavioral ecological approach to thinking about things is it's a patch choice. I can mate with this woman or that woman. There's costs and benefits. And had I not, studied animal behavior, I probably would be an economist because I really like the
mm,
sort of, cost benefit analysis accounting and what's important in that. I mean, in some level, it's economics, old economics, traditional economics is a bereft discipline, as probably well articulated in Ed Wilson's book. Uh, um, oh my God, what was his book that he wrote? Uh,
well, sociobiology was
no, no,
the
no,
huge
no.
one.
Consilience.
Consilience, right?
Consilience
All right.
was probably one of the most influential books I read. Sociobiology was as well, but Consilience was probably one of the most influential books I read because he sort of took an evolutionary approach to lots of different disciplines, pissed off everybody.
Yeah.
But since that book, I mean, there has been a resurgence or a creation of a functional, neuroeconomics and evolutionary economics. So when you start putting the right constraints in to understand behavior and behavioral choices, it makes a lot of sense. Nonetheless, you can choose this patch or that patch to forage in. You can mate with this person or that person. What are the costs? What are the benefits? How do we think about that? So I've been thinking about this, these ideas and this way of viewing a lot of questions, throughout my career. And predation is one of those big risks for lots of things. I could go to this risky place and have sex, or I could not go to this risky place and have sex. Well, do you have other opportunities? Do you not have other opportunities? How do you think about, risk in general? I've been studying anti-predator behavior, throughout my career. So the nature of fear seemed like a logical thing to write
Mm,
about since it influences lots of decisions that animals make. It influences lots of decisions that plants make. It influences lots of the decisions that we make. And fear is one of those emotions that seems to be pretty easy to trace back, phylogenetically. I don't know how you trace back, Schadenfreude. That's probably a uniquely human emotion, but not all of our emotions are uniquely human.
yeah.
And understanding, what and when these evolved and how these work, I think is an interesting way to sort of understand who we are.
Do you think, speaking of sort of uniquely human emotions or experiences, I often think about how much of the fear that we experience is imaginary, right? We're afraid of things that will probably never happen. We're worried about the future. We're, you know, uh, prepping. Where I live, there are a lot of people with guns and canned beans preparing for the end. asteroid strikes, climatological collapse, which may well happen, but probably not in my lifetime or yours. Um, yeah, maybe. We'll see. But my point is that so much of what we stress about is manufactured by our own minds. And I imagine animals, non human animals, do they have that kind of imaginary stress? Or is it even legitimate to call it imaginary? Because the body experiences produced manufactured anxiety the same way as real danger. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I mean, one way of thinking about, fear, it's sort of the extension of anxiety, but all of these are adaptive behaviors. If you do not fear things, you will be killed. Ultimately. I mean, I don't know how Alex Honnold is still alive.
Right.
The guy's brain is wired wrong. He's an incredible athlete, free solo. I used to climb and watching free solo, I was sweating and hyperventilating. The exposure and the things he was doing without ropes was insane. He's an extraordinary athlete and apparently an extraordinary human, but he's wired differently than most of us.
Right.
It's adaptive for us to have anxiety to make us safe. Anxiety makes us safe. Being anxious about being anxious is a pathology, but something you need it. Otherwise, you're not going to last very long. Same way, pain. Some people don't feel pain or don't feel heat. And these people typically die young because they end up burning themselves, et cetera. And that's, these things keep us safe. These are natural defenses. And fear is the extension of that. And PTSD is, in some sense, one trial learning about something that's really bad to then avoid later on. These are adaptive processes. Now, when you get PTSD after being in a car accident or being assaulted or being in a war, that's really sad and that's really bad. And we need to figure out ways to fix that. But these evolved to protect us. These are protective things.
Yeah, they're protective, but isn't it's like a craving for sweetness, right? It's adaptive up to a point, and then it becomes maladaptive.
Maladaptive in different contexts. So, having the ability to have one trial learning about scary things can be very adaptive. Having it triggered by things isn't so adaptive. So, getting back to I think your original question about are we fearing the wrong things? Or are we fearing things that, are we over fearing things? Yes, we're wired to overestimate risk. We're wired to um, in many situations think better safe than sorry versus nothing ventured, nothing gained. So I have a chapter on error management theory, which is a way to begin thinking about those. Um, and in the context of sex, and when I was in high school, I had a friend who would go up to, you know, 10 women at a bar and say, hey, do you want to sleep with me? And, 1 in 10 might say yes. So it's okay to embarrass yourself 9 times if you get, the money shot at the end of it. Um, so if the magnitude of benefit is inordinately large, um, nothing ventured, even though the probability of success is very small, nothing ventured, nothing gained kind of makes sense. But in general, it's probably better safe or sorry, better safe
Yeah.
than sorry.
Yeah, these weren't
And
married women with their husbands.
no, um, and 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 I think that that the problem of this is just it makes us vulnerable to people in powerful positions manipulating this, particularly politicians, by creating fears and anxieties about things that
Mm,
actuarially, are just not true.
right.
Yeah, there's some criminals coming across borders illegally, but the vast majority of people coming across borders are not criminals and rapists and violent people. Yet we tap into that because it's sort of out of our control and it's glorified as in look at this one case where this poor person was murdered and raped and whatever. But we believe we're biased to sort of anchor our assessments of risk to sort of overestimate them. So this
Right.
makes us very vulnerable to people who say I'm gonna make you safe by doing X, Y, and Z, which they're not, and it's going to be at some great cost. So the other thing about the behavioral ecological approach, an economic approach to thinking about behavior, is you choose this patch or that patch, patch A or patch B. You can stay in the safe patch forever, but you're never going to get any rewards. I study marmots. Marmots are burrowing animals. If they go in their burrow and they never come out, they're going to be very safe, but they're going to starve to death. So
Right.
there's different ways of dying as well. So, and there's different costs of being safe. So, what is the cost of safety that we as a society are comfortable with? I think personally, I think we're overreacting right now in many ways.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very interesting how it's turned to political ends. There seems to be, I'm not sure how to articulate this, but there seems to be an appetite for fear. It's not only a negative experience. People go to horror films. Why? Right?
People go
People,
to horror films, they go to fright houses. A colleague studies fright houses, and people love that. People watch adventure. I mean, people watch adventure films and horror films and sort of live through that and prepare themselves. It's play. We're a very playful species. I mean, other species play, and one of the things have studied is play. But play prepares you for um, events later in life. Play is supposed to, as it's defined, play behavior is supposed to be immediately functionless, but has a function potentially later on. And it's hard to study that. It's hard to deprive animals of play and say, well, what function is this by depriving something of something? Because it kind of screws you up. But play prepares us. If you see predators, they engage in predatory play. If you see prey, they engage in prey-like escaping play. This little puppies do a bit of both. They're running away and they're pouncing on things. So going and watching horror films and putting ourselves in that situation allows us to prepare for the zombie apocalypse, allows us to prepare for, what happens when we get kidnapped. Um, Old horror films I like, the torture porn stuff I'm not really into at all, but a lot of people are into it. I mean, these are incredibly popular films that people like, and they like it, I think, because it prepares them for things, and they 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 can they see how to survive. They learn how to survive these incredibly improbable things. I mean, God forbid we're invaded by zombie apocalypse, or we have a zombie apocalypse.
dude, you and I are probably roughly the same age. I grew up terrified of quicksand. That, right? I've never encountered quicksand anywhere, but man, I know how to get out of it. I'm trained. um, okay, so what was I'm looking at my notes here. Uh, right, fear and prey. Oh, okay, here's one of my fear and prey species is processed differently. So I live in Colorado, probably not far from your research site. Um, and one of the things that confuses me here is there are a lot of coyotes where I live and a lot of rabbits. And I'm constantly startled by rabbits because when they see me coming, they don't take off. They wait until I'm 2 feet away and then they take off. And that seems like a very maladaptive behavior pattern when you've got coyotes. Why would they wait until the potential predator is right up next to them before they take off? I would think coyotes are primarily hunting on smell. Is that correct? No?
So, I mean, okay, so what you've just described is an experiment that I've sort of popularized called studying flight initiation distance.
There you
How
go.
close
You're
to
the
how,
guy to
I'm
ask.
the guy. How close can you get to something before it flies, swims, slithers, walks, runs away?
Yeah.
It's also called flush distance. And I realized that you could do this to study the evolution of anti-predator behavior by looking at lots of different species. And then people sort of read some of my papers, and since then, there's sort of been a cottage industry in studying flight initiation distance and all sorts of things. So a former postdoc and I have put together a database, which we need to get out there, I will give him a call today. Um, of about 160,000 flushes on birds. These are pulling together published databases um, on about a third of the species of birds on Earth. There's about 10,000 species of birds. This is about over 3,000 species. I mean, that's insane. So when I say this, I've created a cottage industry, people love scaring things, and it's a little fright. So we have lots of generalizations about that. Some species rely on crypsis. Um, so
Well,
in
what's
Colorado,
Scripsis?
in Colorado, crypsis is not being detectable. It's
Okay,
camouflage, right?
right.
So in Colorado, we have blue grouse, and blue grouse I call heart attack birds. So if you're hiking through and you see a blue grouse, you typically don't see it until you almost step on it, and then it flies up in a big explosion of noise, and you have a heart attack. Um, so they rely on freezing and letting you get really close to them in hopes that you're not going to see them. Um, so other species rely on detecting at great distances. Some species view cover, bushes, things like that as protective. Other species view it as obstructive. So by going and doing these studies on lots and lots of species, you can kind of unpack the rules of life. You can kind of figure out, you know, why and what situations are animals behaving differently, and how can we understand the evolution of those differences. So one of the lessons, even though most 99.9% of the FID studies are conducted by people walking towards things, one of the things, the weak assumption there is that all species respond the same way to real predators.
Hmm.
And people may be real predators in many of these cases. In places where people hunt birds flush at greater distances. So,
Uh,
hunting season, a deer, you can't get as close to deer during hunting season as you can during not hunting season. So there's all sorts of contextual things. But, so the question really is, um, are birds is this rabbit responding the same way to a human as it would a coyote? And the answer is probably not. And you
ah,
probably want to study how they're responding to coyotes as well. Unless there's a very interesting question there. Are they classifying coyotes and humans as the same perceptual category? And sort of the answer for many species is no, that, there's a whole industry in trying to understand how different predators are classified. Are all terrestrial predators classified as the same risk? Are felids classified as a different sort of risk than canids? Are um, eagles and hawks similarly classified as risks?
mm,
Well, what about vultures? I mean, so animals are really good at assessing risk because responding to risks and over responding is costly. You're stopping your foraging. You're not going and you're staying in your burrow and you're not able to go out and eat. It's also dangerous to get out of your burrow in the first place. So animals are really good at making assessments about risk, and animals categorize, as do we, categorize different threats into different categories, and that's really important. So and this ties in with ecotourism. So I'm really into going and looking at animals in nature, as many of us are. Bird watching is a billion-dollar industry globally. Um, uh, People spend a lot of money and time, going into nature to experience nature. It's good for us. Another book I wrote is called The Failure of Environmental Education and How We Can Fix It. I've been thinking about, the importance of experiencing nature and the value of experiencing nature. So we benefit from being around nature. We design more livable cities when we have more parks and we experience, nature. Bottom line, nature is important, but we're loving nature to death. We're going and we're bringing in diseases. We're feeding animals, which is not so good. We're scaring animals. Some animals can tolerate us, some can't tolerate us. So it becomes a really interesting question about how we manage ecotourism. And some of the insights from certainly thinking about risk assessment is one of those things. So in some cases, it's possible that by going in places, we habituate animals to humans. Animals become tolerant to humans. And the question is, do they transfer that tolerance to real predators? Do we increase their vulnerability because they think, oh, well, people are coming really close and they're not hurting us. Maybe real predators are the same thing. And the short answer is that can happen, but it probably doesn't in most situations because, coyotes and wolves are classified differently from humans.
Hmm.
In some cases, it does. There's a monkey called a Saramago monkey in southern Africa, and in places where there's ecotourism, there's also more predation by leopards. They're more vulnerable to leopards. And, so just because you're a monkey doesn't mean you're smart. So that seems to be a case where, after controlling for a whole bunch of other things, the monkeys are let down their guard a bit too much when they're surrounded by too many people.
Hmm.
But if they're really doing that, that means they're really classifying us in the same category as leopards, which I find hard to believe.
Or it could be a secondary effect that there are fewer leopards around when there are people around.
Or there are more leopards around when there are people around. So there are both things can happen.
Right.
In Colorado, where I work, the Rocky Mountain Biological Laboratory, we've had a fox family basically, you know, on campus, which is a sort of old remote mining town, um, since about 2005. And they've been killing all the rodents there, including the marmots I study, which is not so great. Why are they on campus? Because the coyotes are a little more afraid of us than the foxes are. So the
Uh,
foxes are getting are finding safety by being around people, but the coyotes still are afraid of us.
right. So you're causing the cascading event
A
there.
trophic cascade, and the
Yeah.
deer come and drop their fawns, and then they eat the plants that they prefer. And the people studying the plants show that this is a trophic cascade. This is
Yeah.
a cascade of effects of predators influencing fear of their prey that have consequences on the plant structure. And we've published a paper on that in Gothic, and looking at what's going on inside the town site versus just a little bit outside the town site. So
That's
these cascades
fascinating.
can have, small impacts. So are there more predators in towns or not? I mean, I live in Los Angeles much of the year, and there's a bunch of coyotes around my house.
Yeah, not to
Uh,
mention house cats.
Not to mention cats. So I have
Yeah.
a former master's student where you have just submitted the paper yesterday, looked at cat densities in Los Angeles and FID, flight initiation distance in birds, and huge data set. And there isn't really a big impact of variation in cat density on flight initiation distance in Los Angeles. There is in Madrid, there is in Toledo, Spain, but not in Los Angeles. And we're trying
Hmm.
to figure out, why.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, that raises the question of how rapidly different species, prey species, can respond to the presence of novel predators, right? Like you're talking about the presence of humans affecting the behavior of these monkeys in southern Africa. But then, of course, we think about Hawaii or Australia, where or New Zealand, where the presence of cats, suddenly the entire species of birds get wiped out because they just never learned to be afraid of this predator. Um, I guess, is it correct to say that different species respond with at different rates? Like if you're saying a rabbit has classified a human, essentially, I know not consciously probably, but a rabbit somehow knows, like, okay, this human is not a threat. They're slow and they don't smell very well. Whereas a coyote is fast and can detect me with smell, so I have to run sooner. Um, why is it that dodo birds, or I forget the species in Hawaii that got wiped out by the rats? Why do they not respond in time to save themselves?
So I've spent, over a quarter century working in Australia as well. And I went there specifically to understand these processes of what happens when you sort of move from the dangerous inner city to suburbia. Because humans introduced foxes, red foxes, and cats to Australia about 250 years ago or so. And those two species, along with rabbits, which were introduced as well, have basically fed those populations, but the cats and the foxes have been influential in driving over 30 species of mammals alone extinct.
Hmm.
on the mainland, and in some cases entirely extinct. Australia has the worst record of recent mammalian extinctions on Earth, and all of these can be, really ultimately traced back to cats and foxes. Yet some populations survived on offshore islands, and some populations were put onto islands. And the question is, when you go from the dangerous inner city to the suburbs, how long do you continue leaving, your car locked and alarms set, et cetera? When do you relax?
Right.
Um, so it's really the evolutionary loss of anti-predator behavior. How does that work? On what time frame? So I was looking at tammar wallabies and kangaroos on different places on the mainland on Australia, offshore islands, and then tammar wallabies were introduced to New Zealand, where they were an invasive pest, but nonetheless had no predators there. And this led to there's a whole bunch of ideas for the persistence of anti-predator behavior under relaxed selection, so the loss of predators. And there's all that ties in with how do you discriminate or recognize or identify predators in the first place. So, I mean, one idea is that predators may look or smell similarly, in which case, there might be some evolved template that if a new predator comes in, but it's similar to an existing predator, maybe there's a suite of anti-predator behaviors that work for those things. Anti-predator behaviors, when you really think about them and sort of autonomize them, involve vigilance, looking around, involves looking to detect things. Well, you'll never not be vigilant, because if there's any benefits from vigilance, even social vigilance, looking up for conspecifics, you need to do that as well. So, vigilance is something that will persist for other functions, even if it's not simply anti-predator vigilance. So, that could lead to the persistence of anti-predator behavior under relaxed selection. Other, things could persist or not persist. All sorts of really interesting anti-predator studies with fish, and chemical detection, where these templates really seem to be used in the sense that prey of trout respond to the trout they live with, and then it sort of the degree of response decreases with phylogenetic distance of other predatory trout or fish.
Hmm.
So, and that's probably because of the chemicals they produce. So you can train fish to respond to a predator by grinding its skin up and then making an elixir of the skin, in which there are chemicals that prey species, both invertebrates and other fish, detect immediately and pair that. And
Huh.
then if you make that elixir from a more distant related species of predatory fish, it will lead to less of a response, or it'll be harder to train. So,
Hmm.
there's an example of a predatory template. And the templates could account for, responding to different things. So, a major question, a lot of what I do thinks about foundational behavioral questions, but then applies them to conservation questions, like, what happens in Hawaii. Well, a bunch of things happen in Hawaii, but including, novel predators and malaria. But in Australia, the question is, can you inculcate fear into these animals that might have existed on offshore islands and you bring them back to the mainland? So, colleagues and I did that by trying to train them about predators, using associative learning. We showed that this is Andrea Griffith's PhD work. We showed that they can learn, that they selectively learn about predators. So you can do the same sort of thing where you're trying to inculcate fear, but instead of using a stuffed fox, you use a stuffed goat. They don't learn that. They learn about the fox. So there's something about fox
Hmm.
morphology that they,
Hmm.
and that they can transfer that socially. So that sort of
That's
sets up
interesting.
everything to kind of win in the long run, because you could have a demonstrator that knows what fear is, and they could teach others, or others learn from that demonstrator, freaking out when a predator comes. Does that work? Well, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Kind of doesn't, in the sense that these animals are probably outgunned. Foxes and cats play a different game than the predators that marsupials evolved with. Um,
Like
all
hunting
kangaroo
technique.
Possibly,
Yeah.
and they also surplus kill. I mean, I don't really know what thylacines do, because
Yeah.
they're gone. Dingoes are a wolf basically, but they're kind of closely related to wolves. They're their own species, but dingoes. These animals lived with dingoes for about 5,000 years, but they did not live with cats and foxes. Cats and foxes are doing something different. What's super interesting is all macropodid marsupials, kangaroos and wallabies and rat kangaroos, uh, stomp their hind feet in alarm as a signal. And it could be a predator detection signal. I see you. It could be an alarm call to others.
Hmm.
The others respond to that thump, but they'll look at the predator and they'll stomp their feet. Hey, I detect you. You're not going to get me. Well, if foxes and cats can overcome that, and it's like, hey, this is a dinner bell rather than a predator detection thing,
Right.
they're playing the wrong game with the wrong predator.
Right.
So it's a
Right.
mismatch. So that's a possibility. There also are a lot of foxes and cats because there's lots of rabbits. So if you get rid of the rabbits, then there's not as many foxes and cats.
Hmm.
Um, More recently, we've tried to inculcate fear in different ways. We've tried to let animals live with their predators. So Catherine Mosby is a friend and colleague who 15 years ago, almost 20 years ago now, maybe, um, cold emailed me and said, I've tried your predator training stuff and it doesn't work. And I said, how'd you do it? Oh, we shot rubber bands and water pistols at animals, and then they didn't really learn anything. Then we put them out with predators and they got killed. I'm like, oh, okay, well, maybe you could try this, maybe you could try that. I don't think any of this stuff works. I think you need to just throw animals in and let them try to live with predators. And the ones that can live with predators, those are the ones that know how to deal with predators. And I said, I think that's unethical. And we argued for a month. And at the end of the month, it's like we both learned. And she's like, I'm putting together a proposal to try this. Do you want to be part of this? And I said, yeah, to keep you honest. So we collaborated for over a decade, where she and her husband founded something called Arid Recovery. Um, Arid Recovery is a um, huge 126 square kilometer fenced reserve
Oh,
divided
yeah.
into huge paddocks. And she and her husband designed fences that were cat proof and fox proof. That took a long time to design, but floppy, tall, etc. So they were predator free, and they brought animals back from offshore islands and were building up populations there. Problem is, when you have prey without predators, you've got a problem, because nothing eats them, and then they overeat the environment. But nonetheless, what we were going to do, and what we did for almost a decade, was take some animals and put them in with a few cats, and then more cats, and then more cats. And what we found, we were working with two species, burrowing bedongs, which are a social, cat-sized, ground-dwelling, burrowing wallaby, basically, a rat kangaroo, and bilbies, which look like a rugby ball with ears, um, and they're more solitary. And we're studying how they were changing their anti-predator behavior over time. We were all really concerned. What happens if the cats will kill them all? Well, no, the cats won't necessarily kill them all. We actually showed that they can coexist with cats. They can prosper with cats. Populations exploded living with low densities of cats, and then even higher densities of cats. What threw the wheels off the wagon was a drought, like a 3 year drought.
Hmm.
When the cats had nothing else to eat, some of them started specializing on these animals, and that caused a problem. But nonetheless, we showed that in certain contexts, you can actually have these animals coexisting. And then for the bedongs, which were more of them and we could study them better, we saw a divergence in morphology. They got bigger feet and anti-predator behavior. They changed their flight initiation distances. They changed their detection about predators. They became better prey. So basically, Catherine would joke that we're building better bedongs by letting them live with cats. And then the question is, well, let's take these bilbies and bedongs and let's the control ones that did not have cats and the ones with cats, and let's throw them into another fenced enclosure where we have cats. Do they survive better if they had experience? And we did this twice, and the bilbies survived longer, and the bedongs didn't, and we don't know why.
Hmm.
Other than the bedongs are social, And maybe the cats, when we had these killer cats, they would target these groups of animals and would keep killing them until they killed them all. So maybe this works, maybe it doesn't. It clearly does for one species, it doesn't necessarily for the other species. Um, so context is everything. There's species differences in how they learn and how they can learn, and there's differences in the cat behavior as well. Catherine also studies the cat behavior in hunting cats. So when we think about how fear persists. When you lose predators or the consequences of a novel species, there may be ways of addressing these things in a conservation context. And the real challenge is you can build enclosures and save animals in Australia and New Zealand, but ultimately you probably want to try to get them living outside the fence. And even if you have them living inside the fence, you're going to have issues with too many prey and no predators. So you're going to have to think about creating ecosystems that are a little more functional.
Which reminds me of your mention of your friend Ralph, who worked at Biosphere too. I actually met the folks who designed that. They have a ranch down in Santa Fe, and one of the Biosphereans, I had him on the podcast, and we talked about that experience. Another connection. Um, that was a sad moment in your book when you talked
Yeah,
about that.
Rafe Zagrin was a genius. He was uh, a super interdisciplinary thinker. And when I was giving my tenure talk about, I'm talking about anti-predator behavior, he was in the audience at UCLA, and he's like, "Hey, I'm putting together this group, and I think you think broadly, and this is after 9/11, and he's like, I think you know we need to sort of think about developing a field of natural security or
Mm,
evolutionary inspired security and defense. Would you be interested in being part of this?" Super interesting.
yeah.
I still teach my classes using techniques that he brought to our meetings, which is for many of my classes, I let the students create the syllabus and we co-create it together, and
Mm.
then everyone's vested. And
And
that
you
sort of
and you get
co-create.
to learn too.
Come on. Why
Yeah.
am I in this game? Because I learn. Why
Yeah.
do I teach? Because I learn. If I'm not learning, it's kind of boring.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Hey, let me ask you a question. Uh, I was in Tanzania last couple of years ago, and like you, I've traveled all over the world. I've interacted with wild animals, but I got very confused about the way African animals react to jeeps, and trucks.
Me too. I don't understand that.
Oh, good. Okay. I thought you were going to give me a really easy answer. I mean,
I don't know. I mean,
what the
I've been on
hell?
safaris, and it's like you're in this open vehicle and you're right next to lions, and I mean literally right next to lions. And it's like, huh? And you can't do that with with polar bears. I
Yeah.
mean, polar bears will kill you.
Or grizzly bears or, wolves, they see you coming, they take off. I mean, they
Grizzlies, you can
recognize.
go to platforms and look at grizzlies. You're in the cage or you're in the location and they know where you are and you can watch them.
Yeah.
I try not to go to grizzly habitat during grizzly season, but nonetheless, polar bears will come after you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But I mean, even the grizzlies, they know you're there. I spent a lot of time in Alaska working in the salmon industry. And yeah, so I had a lot of grizzly encounters, and they know you're there. They know you're a person, and they decide whether they're going to mess with you or not. And polar bears, as you say, they'll just come and eat you. But yeah, very confusing. The way lions and leopards and they just seem to like, I know they smell us, they know what humans smell like, and the guides all said if you stepped out of the truck, immediately. So it's that template, I guess you were talking about, where it's like something on legs is prey, but these big metal boxes,
And they ignore you. I mean,
yeah,
in these parks, you can just drive up to a pack of sleeping lions and
it's so
be 2 feet
strange.
away from this. It's bizarre. I do not get it.
Yeah. Okay. Something you were saying earlier reminded me of something I've always been confused by. You're talking about fish, and I think about these nature documentaries where there's a shark just that's eaten, and it's cruising around, and all the smaller fish that would be prey fish are unperturbed. Or a lion's walking through and there's a herd of gazelle and they're kind of like, oh yeah, there's a lion, but no big deal. Can they can prey species sense when a predator is hungry? or are there
The,
behavior patterns or something that indicate this?
Yeah, well, time of day is one of them. So again,
Ah,
if every time you see a predator, so the gazelles are a good one. During the day, if a lion's walking through, the gazelles will ignore it. Not at night. Crepuscular times when you don't really want to be in the water with sharks. The fish may keep their distance, but they're not going to like completely scatter. So, it behooves individuals to learn feeding time at the zoo. Um, and why? Because it's costly to engage in any predator behavior that's not functional.
right.
So, individuals, if there's variation in individuals that can do better jobs than not better jobs, those individuals are going to have more time and energy to devote to other things that increase their fitness rather than being, afraid. It's not bad to be anxious. It's bad to be anxious about being anxious.
Mhm.
So, anxiety keeps us alive. Spending too much time on being anxious is not good.
Yeah. Which brings me to the question of why do human babies cry? They make so much fucking noise, you would think that would attract predators.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the ideas is that it does attract predators, and then parents give them, so it's extortion, right? And cries aren't cries.
Right.
There can be cries of joy, there can be cries of pain. I mean, those real cries of pain. I have a chapter on the sound of fear in the book, and talk about the sound of fear. Baby cries, real baby cries, are noisy. This is new research that's been done since I wrote the book. But people study cries, and there's different sort of cries. The same way there's different sort of laughs. And the real ones, the real cries, are chock full of what are called nonlinearities, which really attract our attention. And but cries are also extortive. So babies are extorting care, from their parents. I came to my
Mm.
office today for this discussion because we have a puppy at home, and this puppy just barks, and it's happy barking. It's like, play with me, do something now, bark, bark, bark. And it's like, I can't have that in the background the whole day. So I'll go home and play with it later.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. So the babies sense that their cries attract immediate parental attention and
Whether they sense it, how they do it, a lot of these things you don't have to sort of put in a cognitive element. You're tempted to for humans or not. I mean, I don't think we're behaving particularly smart ways right now with how we listen to our politicians foment fear. But if there's variation in individuals and that has some genetic basis, and those that behave one way do better in the long run, you will have evolution of these sorts of responses. If
mm,
there's plasticity, meaning within lifetime changes, and some individuals are more plastic and can learn and respond, you're going to have some individuals doing better than other individuals.
right.
So whether it's a plastic response within a generational or between generational response, evolutionary response. If there's differences, and these are consistent differences, some individuals will do better than others, and those are the ones that are going to ultimately potentially leave offspring.
Right, right. Like you, I've spent a lot of time traveling. And one of the things that I've learned, like if I had to list like five lessons I've learned in life, that uh, have helped me, is that, and maybe you'll tell me I'm wrong about this, but my feeling is that fear attracts danger.
Hmm.
And, like if you walk down the street looking like a victim, it attracts predators, it attracts muggers, it attracts bullies, it attracts. So there's a certain, and maybe this is similar to, they say if a bear approaches you, you don't turn and run, or a cougar or something, right? Because that triggers the predatory behavior. Whereas if you face him and back away slowly, you're less likely to trigger that behavior. Um, so I guess my question is, there's this sort of truism that dogs can smell fear, right? Or that any predatory animal can smell fear. Is that literally true? Is fear something that are there in chemicals that are released by the body that attract predators? And if
Yeah,
so,
I mean,
why wouldn't prey animals have evolved to not do that?
yeah. Well, I mean, there may be some constraints. I mean, if you're afraid, you have a metabolic process, and you're excreting things, and that could be a signal to others to other conspecifics, and maybe the predators are detecting it as well. So that's an unintended recipient. So it becomes a cue. It might have evolved to be a conspecific signal, but it becomes a cue of vulnerability to a predator. So it's
Mm,
something that can be captured and used to assess risk or assess vulnerability. I mean, humans are super good at detecting emotional states in other humans or looking for signs of health or vulnerability. Um, you don't need someone saying much to understand, if they're severely developmentally disabled, right? We detect that acoustically. You don't need much to sort of see if someone is to see someone moving to understand whether they're physically vulnerable based on how they're moving. We're really good at that. That's probably evolved for different functions. Some of it could be, we're really good at detecting sick people because, who wants to
mm,
be around sick people? Notice I said I would have been an economist, not a physician. Who wants to be around sick people all the time? Get
mm,
sick from sick people. Thank God they're physicians. Uh, but these are probably go back phylogenetically, ancestrally functional things. And when I say ancestrally functional, I don't just mean in the human lineage. I mean all the way back. You know, Other animals have all sorts of ways of avoiding getting sick, including identifying other sick animals or detecting, sickness in things. Whether or not individuals interact with feces or not, or interact with dead animals or not, whether they avoid dead animals, many do, or dead conspecifics. Um, Many do. These are probably adaptive ways to avoid being exposed to pathogens. So there's a huge pressure to stay safe. Similarly, when you become really social, you have to interact with others. Who do you choose to interact with? How do you know that they're safe, that they're, good in sense of not harming you in other ways? Um, how do you assess these? Well, we've probably evolved to assess these as have other social animals. Whether you
right,
study those in marmots or primates or fish, it sort of depends. But I think that using many different modalities, making assessments about things is really what it's about. Getting
right,
information.
right, right. Okay, my last question is, your research is focused on real world threats, predators, communicable disease, as you were just talking about, like real stuff. But a lot of what humans spend their time being afraid of is, for lack of a better phrase, let's call it existential fear, right? Fear of mortality, fear of imagined threats that I mentioned earlier. Um, the physiology is the same, right? I mean, the release of adrenaline and corticoids and so on, um, elevated heart rate and all that. Uh, has your research brought you to techniques for controlling fear or for distinguishing between something that is a legitimate cause of fear versus an imagined non-necessary source of fear?
Yes and no. I mean, I think it comes down to the basics of, not letting your, thinking slow and thinking fast. Kahneman's,
I was going to
Tversky's
ask
work,
you if you'd read
right?
that
So,
book. Yeah.
so, so thinking fast are these adaptive, quick responses. But when you're sort of engaged with, and what politicians who want us to fear immigrants, is trying to get us to, think fast. But if you think more slowly, if you take a step back, how many people really are criminals? Some are, some aren't, many aren't. What is the real risk? What is the context of this? Thinking about those things, making more informed, slower decisions based on assessments is one way of recalibrating and coming up with a proper assessment of risk. And if, some people might be tuned to be a little more um, nervous around the same level of risk than others. Our son used to be a diver and do springboard and platform diving, and I used to climb a lot, and I hadn't in years. And I've climbed things very exposed and it's kind of fun. Used to be kind of fun, but he was doing the 10-meter platform. So I climb up the tower one day and start walking out to the edge, and I'm like, "Ugh." I'm like, whoa, this is a wild feeling. I haven't experienced that in a while. And he's like, small and going up and diving off the thing. It's like, wow, that's really wild. I wasn't falling off that platform. I wasn't anywhere near the edge, and I started having this amazing response.
Yeah.
So that was probably an adaptive response, but you talk yourself, you train yourself to to get closer to it. So we can learn to manage our fears, but we can also learn to make better assessments that will give us a gauge on what that true risk is. But risk involves uncertainty, and what we're failing to teach people is one, how to think about uncertainty and making decisions. A politician who says that I will make you safe and only I can make you safe, it's just lying. I mean, there's always risks. Um, should we pay attention to these existential risks or not? I mean, these existential risks are new risks created by us. I think we should pay attention to the existential risk of nuclear war. I think that we have created a genie that can kill us all, and we have mechanisms for that. Nuclear winter. We have created a process that, in some sense, automates us and marches us towards nuclear annihilation. Am I overestimating risk? No, I don't really think I am. I think the probability of a accidental nuclear war, a big one, ratchets up and up and up as we get rid of alliances and break democratic norms and weaken controls on all of this stuff. I mean, the Union of Concerned Scientists has a clock to annihilation,
Yeah.
and we keep what are we, 10 seconds away, 11 seconds away from annihilation? I mean, it's insane. um, and that sort of insanity is something I think we need to pay attention to. I have not really followed the AI existential risk literature.
Well,
And then
combine
there's
that
some
with the
things
nukes.
and then there's some things that, we can't control. An asteroid will hit us at
Yeah.
some point,
Yeah.
right? And that will kill lots of people. Live while you can. But
Super volcano.
there are many risks we can manage.
Yeah.
There are some risks that are harder to manage, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. So thinking about probability and consequence, you clearly want to work on, in a triage way, you want to work on the things with a high probability of happening.
Yeah.
Wear your seatbelt in a car, right? Uh, but then control the things that you can control. But there are things you can't control, and we fear those things we lose control over. We fear things that have gruesome outcomes. Uh, and we're biased to fear certain sorts of things more than others. And that sort of taps us away from logical thinking. And I think we have to slow down our assessments in those situations.
Yeah, for sure. As I said earlier, I spent a lot of time worried about quicksand while riding a motorcycle. I mean, talk about bad assessment of risk. Uh,
Hopefully with a helmet.
yeah. Oh, yeah. I wear a helmet. Thank you, Dan, for your time. Thank you for coming into the office so we didn't have to listen to your puppy. I love puppies, but not on a podcast.
Yeah, no, thanks for a fun discussion.
Yeah. Yeah. I really enjoyed it. I'm going to stop recording now.